Welcome to Write Your Book in a Flash with Dan Janal, the only podcast where you'll learn how successful people just like you have grown their businesses, expanded their influence, and made more money by writing a book. On each episode, you'll learn the inside secrets to help you create a book that can serve as a powerful marketing tool to skyrocket your business. I'm your host, Dan Janal. I help thought leaders, business executives, and entrepreneurs write their books. To find out more, go to writeyourbookinaflash.com. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Mark Faust. How are you doing today, Mark?
Outstanding.
Fantastic. Mark, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been consulting for 33 years now, actually. Out of school, I consulted for a couple of years with an HR consulting firm, and they helped me actually to start my own consulting firm, Echelon Management, in 1990. We are a growth advisory firm, worked with several hundred companies, clients over the years, and focus on working with the top echelon around growing the value of the company as well as the top and bottom line. And we do that through strategy and innovation and culture, the high growth levers, as we call it.
Sounds fascinating. So, Mark, why did you decide to write a book?
Marketing. It is the gold standard of a key into the door of the executive suite. I had written some pamphlets or white papers and had been publishing articles, and they were excellent to use as a mailer to people. But there was nothing like a three-dimensional hard copy in the hands of my economic buyer. And I knew that if I could get a bound book rather than just a spiral-bound white paper or something like that, it'd have a lot more credibility.
Fantastic. And what did you decide to write about?
Well, growth. And what enabled me to get published twice by two publishers was having a unique angle. And my unique angle in that area happened to be around a term I coined called the turnaround mindset, which came to me from my interviews when I started my company. I interviewed literally a couple of dozen of excellent CEOs, many of whom were turnaround CEOs, and I would ask about how they did it and could those tools be used in good times as well as bad. And it just kind of accidentally I stumbled upon that term. And so that was the unique angle, but the general umbrella of all my books is growth.
And what aspect of growth did you write about that made you sound different from everyone else?
Yeah. So the turnaround mindset was totally unique. Mm-hmm. And but also what was unique is I wanted it to be very much a how-to book. In fact, we've had, I'll tell you one story to illustrate the point. My first book, Growth or Bust, I sent to one of my CEO clients, a CEO at John Deere. And Tim Murphy was heading up a $17 billion division. And he told me what was unique about the book. I sent it to him in January, just after finishing it. I had till May to get him to give an endorsement. And I called every month, and he wasn't returning my calls, and I thought I was going to lose him. And even after a week's extension, I still thought he's not going to get back. And literally the night before deadline, he gave me this glowing endorsement, and I had to whittle it down a bit to fit on the back cover. And I called him the next day to thank him, and he told me what was unique about the book. And he said, Mark, and I asked him, did you actually read the book? And he goes, well, I got to make a confession. It sat there on my desk for probably a couple of weeks, and Mike picked it up, and then he made copies. And I don't know if that's okay and legal, but man, we all read it and decided to, we're reading it, and we decided to read it together, a chapter at a time as a team. And it was the best management exercise I've ever done in my entire career. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And he said, yeah, it's the only business book we've ever had that actually gave us how-to in step-by-step directions. And you just held nothing back in the detail of how to implement these tools. And I said, that's great. Do you mind if I say that and quote you on that? And what was the result? And then he said, well, Mark, I mean, you mentioned one of your goals was to create and protect jobs. You can mark it down for 100 that we've created or saved. And then, in regards to growth and profit, maybe 100 million we could chalk up for the last 3. I said, hold on a second. So reading the book as a team was the best management exercise ever, and it yielded a net creation or savings of 100 jobs and $100 million of increased profit. And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, can I put that in the back of the book? And he goes, absolutely. I called the publisher, and they're like, are you kidding me? We turned that in an hour and a half ago. It's probably done being printed. So we missed the first printing on that, but that was the quote and the testimonial, and he's been a great reference ever since. So that's what's unique. It's very much a how-to, and I've heard that over and over again from a variety of CEOs who used it as a handbook.
Fantastic. Great story. Love the quotes. How do you write a how-to book? I mean, you have very interesting concepts and ideas. How do you break them down so that a team can implement them?
My biggest fear wasn't being able to write, because I could spit out 600 words for an article in an hour or two every month for my articles that are published. But my fear was, could I write exactly 50,000 words for each of these books? I had, a 50,000 word contract. And I remember asking the publisher, and this goes right back to your question, Dan, but I asked the publisher, well, how close to that 50,000 do I have to be? Can it be like 52, 53, 40? No, you'd be out of contract. You'd have to send your check back. I'm like, oh, geez, how close? And they're like, 500 words, one way or the other. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So thankfully, what really helped me to write a how-to easily is we created a valid and detailed outline of the book. Mm-hmm. And so anybody can talk for 2 to 5 minutes about any topic they're an expert on. And basically, we had 12 chapters that each of which had about 3 to 6 subtopics in them. And so all I had to do was write about 600 to 1,500 words on each of these subtopics. And I created a spreadsheet that mapped out how many words would total up at the end of the book. Because I was, with the deadline coming up, I had to figure out, could I really get this done? And I added up that spreadsheet, and it added up to under 51,000 words. And I thought, wow, if I can stick to this on each of these chapters, the word counts, I'll be able to do it. But that outline is what enables you to really, I think, write about how to do something very explicitly and easily, and just create a great outline is the number one key to, I think, being able to write a book quickly and in the way that you want to.
Definitely. I talk about that in my book. In fact, the subtitle of my book is called The Paint by Numbers System for Writing a Book, which the paint by numbers is essentially an outline. It's a visual outline. And
great metaphor. In fact, you may have inspired me because I remember, the hardest part was not writing the book, but writing the outline for the book when writing the book proposal, because the agent I was using really had me do everything on that. And so I think you inspired that, and I thank you for that.
I had no idea. Thank you very much. Let's do a jumping off point there of finding an agent. I mean, many people who are listening to this will self-publish because they can't find an agent or because the topic isn't broad enough for a major publisher. But how did you find an agent? It's almost as hard to find an agent as it is to find a publisher.
Well, I wish I would have found a real literary agent. Instead, I found an attorney who was very well educated, a Notre Dame grad that is one of the most brilliant men I know. And Bill was my agent. I was helping him. He actually, through my coaching, became the head partner at his law firm, and doing a lot of the things that are actually in that first book. And then he, as a kind of a quid pro quo, because I'd never really charged him for any of that, says, "Hey, I want to be your agent. I'll do all the negotiations. I won't take the cut. You can have all the advance, blah, blah, blah." Because usually agents get the whole advance. And I thought that was nice because, anyhow. And frankly, I knew how to write a good book proposal. There's books out there on doing that. So I wrote an excellent book proposal. I got 4 or 5 offers from legitimate publishers with 3 legitimate advances from $5,000 to $15,000. And I chalk it up to, 1, I have a good market to sell to, lots of speeches being given, thousands of emails to promote to, and thousands of people I speak to and write to in the articles I get published. So that was a green flag, I think, to a lot of publishers. But yeah, getting the agent was serendipity and not your typical course. And I wish I had a real agent, because it took a lot of work that normally an agent does. So I don't know that I'll ever self-publish and aim to get published by a publisher without an agent again. Just too much work.
Okay, thanks for that experience. Many people have trouble finding an agent, and without an agent, publishers won't talk to you unless you know someone on their staff. So very, very good. And how long ago was that? Just so we have a time frame, because the world of publishing has changed tremendously in just a short period of time.
Yeah, the first professionally published book by Career Press was 2011, I believe. Okay. And then the second one would have been 2017, I believe.
Okay, great. Okay, good. So let's go back to the idea of writing about the book. What problems did you have in actually writing the book, and what did you learn now what did you discover in the process that you wish you knew when you first started?
It was the opposite of problems. To me, I've written 4 books, 2 self-published, one back in 1990, one a couple of years ago that is up on Amazon, and then the 2 that were picked up by the publishers. Every one of them was an experience of the greatest joy. I would chalk it up in my top 10 favorite experiences to write those books. So maybe 10 to 20% of the book's already written with your sample chapters. So you've got about 40,000 some odd words to write. And I wrote every one of those books in under 2 weeks, at least 80% of it. Now, the other 20% might have been written before that. But those 2 weeks, while working, typical full work schedule of consulting, which gives me a lot of flexibility, I would write from the morning, make my calls, and then go back to writing right into the evening and have the energy from the beginning to the end of the day. And it was such joy. So the problems weren't what people typically think, because I love my topic. I love business. I love growing business. I love the people who lead business and own businesses. They're in a very lonely and challenging situation, which literally holds our economy up. And Atlas is a great, metaphor for business leadership and ownership and management. The biggest problems it goes back to and challenges would be the time it took to find a publisher, being that I was really doing the work of what an agent typically does. It took me less time to self-publish a Kindle Direct published effort, a KDP effort, than it did to write the book proposals. And so my regrets or my challenges, what I would do different is I would much more quickly self-publish. While we sold out the 5,000 copies of books that they print for those 2 books, I got the rights back from both of them. And I feel free to have my intellectual property and all the profit back, because the other problem is when you get published, you got to pay, 10, 15, depending on how much they price your book at, somewhere between probably $7 to $umpteen per book. And this is your new business card. And I tried to send out as many of those or give away as many of those as possible. So the biggest problem is the cost of being published professionally. And I far prefer being self-published now, where I can price my book on Amazon for as low as you can, depending on the length of the book, like $4, and buy it for $4 and mail it and basically have fulfillment done by Amazon. So I highly exhort people to consider self-publishing. And that is a paradigm shift, I think, on the problems or the challenges of writing your own book.
Yeah, it's amazing how easy they make it for you. In fact, one of my clients wanted to pay me extra to post their book on Amazon. I almost felt guilty for taking their money. And I think I didn't take their money. I think, we'll just include this. This is fine. Because they had no idea how easy it really is. It's filling out a simple form. Anyone could do this, but again, if you've never done it before, it can be daunting. So I completely understand that. But the cost of, or the minimal cost that they do for what they do is just a tremendous bargain. So
Yep.
really good stuff. You touched a little bit on your marketing plan of giving away books. What else do you do in terms of using your book to get clients?
So at every speech, I try to get the book covered in the speaking fee, and it's synergistic. Having the book helps you to get speaking opportunities and gives you credibility. But then selling or giving the book away again gives you more credibility and gravitas and causes a greater likelihood for there to be follow-up. Your book sits on their desk as they intend to read it for those first few months before it eventually ends up on their shelf. Mm-hmm. And I remember the advice of Tom Peters. He shared in a group we had him speak to consultants, and he said, nobody ever really reads your book. I sold 10 million copies of In Search and Excellence, and 90% of the people never read it. 10% read 8% read the first two chapters. And, his joke was only about 30 people actually read my book and understood it cover to cover. And they didn't even, so there's some truth to that. But on the other hand, there are some people that will read it and will be captured. I'll never forget the first time I walked into what would become a great client. I'd given the book away at a Vistage CEO roundtable speech, and the daughter of a fifth generation printing company who should have become the next CEO, the sixth generation CEO, gave it to her dad, who was the CEO. And he had his brothers and two nephews read the book, and they read it cover to cover, and they invited me in, and they said, we need your help. We read your book. We decided we need to have the turnaround mindset, but implementation is our problem. And this is the opportunity a book presents, is you can give them the step-by-step directions. And John Deere was my client too. So they had already had my coaching and had my other tools and help and implementation. But when people read and you've shared everything, they still need your help. And these guys ended up hiring me, and within the next 6 weeks, we found $600,000 of improvement and literally saved a fifth generation company that many consultants had told them to shutter down and sell out and liquidate. And they did. They took the battle. They saved the company and 110 jobs in a neighborhood just a mile or two from where I grew up. And I was so proud of that. And that's an exception to the rule of people reading your book. But, whether they read it or not, it's going to be a marketing tool that can change your business forever for anybody in any position. There's just nothing like the gravitas of being a published author.
Fantastic. Do you have any final words of advice for our listeners?
Write. Whether you get published or not, I think one of the greatest blessings is that I am forced to write less than 600 words. It amazed me from the first article and now 120 articles later, how big of a challenge it is to keep it under 600. And I'm amazed at how often my articles are exactly 600 words. But that discipline of writing just 600 words every month, and then other articles that come up and whatnot with that, or whatever constraints they have on time and word count, makes you a better writer. And read the great writers. There's a few authors out there. David Ogilvy would be one of the best of all time. The way in which he writes is so excellent. His handling of the English language inspires you to write better. There are great thinkers like Peter Drucker or whatnot, but the great writers will empower you to write. I was a terrible writer, but the more you write, the better you get, and then just do something. Self-publish, print it on your own, print it on your print. I printed books on my printer and took them to have them bound, and those self-published books that I don't count in my 4 books, they still work as great marketing materials and got me business. And I think almost anybody can do that in almost any business. Getting a book is probably the most valuable marketing weapon you'll ever get in your business career. And it was my greatest regret is I didn't do it sooner.
Fantastic. That's a great way to close out our conversation. Mark, how can people get in touch with you, and who is your ideal client?
growthorbust.com. And my ideal client is the owner or top leadership of a company or division that is successful, but knows that they could raise the bar and increase their effectiveness and growth rate, their valuation. I love clients that are in the midst of selling or buying a business, and we never fail to find untapped potential within existing customer bases of companies that are $20 million or larger.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for listening to Write Your Book in a Flash with Dan Janal, the only podcast that shows you exactly how people just like you have built their businesses by writing a book. If you'd like to write your book but don't know where to start, you can find great information at writeyourbookinaflash.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another insightful interview to help you become a top business leader.